Welcome, esteemed visitors, to the Zarkonian Academy for Exceptional Minds. I am Professor Qrell, Head of Transdimensional Studies and your guide for today's tour. Professor Qrell gestured grandly with his upper limbs, his blue-tinted skin glistening under the Academy's specialized lighting. His voice carried the perfect blend of authority and condescension that came from 12 centuries of academic superiority. For those unfamiliar with our institution, though I can't imagine who wouldn't be, the Zarkonian Academy stands as the premier educational establishment in 7 galactic clusters. We've produced 18 galactic presidents, 32 Nobel Quasar Prize winners, and the inventor of faster-than-light waste disposal. He paused dramatically, allowing his audience to absorb the magnificence of this information. His dorsal fins fluttered with unmistakable pride. Our facilities include 300 specialized learning chambers, each equipped with the latest in psychic enhancement technology, gravity-variable environments, and of course, our famous thought capture mattresses that automatically record brilliant ideas for patent submission. As he floated down the central corridor, students of various species scurried out of his way. Some had tentacles, others propelled themselves on cushions of self-generated gas, while a few resembled walking crystal formations that chimed musically with each step. Our acceptance rate: a mere 0.00002% of applicants. We test not just intelligence that's a given, but creativity across 13 dimensions, ethical reasoning in paradoxical scenarios, and the ability to calculate quantum uncertainties while under psychic pressure. Professor Qrell's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, though it was still perfectly audible throughout the hall. Between us, we've had to reject royalty from the Cygnus Imperium. Can you imagine? Simply didn't have the mental capacity for our rigorous curriculum. He straightened up, all 4 eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of his species' amusement. Now, you may have heard rumors about our newest addition. Yes, it's unfortunately true. The Galactic Council, in their questionable wisdom, has instituted a diversity initiative requiring us to accept a student from every recognized sentient species, including, he seemed to struggle with the word, humans. The way he pronounced humans made it sound like a particularly unpleasant medical condition. Earth representatives insist their species has unique perspectives to offer higher education. Ha! A species that still gets excited about basic holotechnology and struggles with simple telepathic communication. Their brains are practically analog. Professor Qrell shook his head, fins drooping in exaggerated dismay. Did you know humans need to verbally speak all their thoughts? They can't even project basic emotional states without contorting their facial muscles. And their physical limitations, goodness. Single-jointed appendages, no natural defenses. And completely dependent on a narrow band of temperature and atmospheric composition. He waved dismissively, causing ripples in his semi-transparent outer membrane. The Academy Board fought this decision naturally. But politics prevailed over academic standards, as it sometimes does. So we're stuck with our first human student. We've had to install special breathing apparatus throughout the campus, reduce radiation levels in one entire dormitory wing. And worst of all, implement stairs alongside our gravity tubes. Stairs. Like we're operating in the pre-space age. Professor Qrell's skin briefly flashed purple with indignation before he composed himself. Nevertheless, we are scientific minds above all. We will observe this human specimen, document its inevitable struggles, and compile what will surely be a fascinating case study in educational futility, if nothing else. It will provide our actual students with a valuable lesson in why the galactic hierarchy exists as it does. With a self-satisfied nod, Professor Qrell continued his tour. Utterly confident in his assessment of humanity's limitations and blissfully unaware of how spectacularly wrong he was about to be proven. The great hall of the Zarkonian Academy buzzed with unusual energy as Dean Volmar's crystalline form glittered at the podium, refracting light in patterns that signaled extreme displeasure to those who understood her species' communication. Attention, faculty and administrative staff. I have news. The assembled aliens representing over 30 different species from across the galaxy shifted uneasily. News delivered in that particular tone and light pattern was never good. The Galactic Educational Council has implemented a new mandate called the Cross-Species Knowledge Exchange Initiative, effective immediately. All Class A educational institutions must accept exchange students from all recognized sentient species. Her crystal structure briefly flashed a deep red, the equivalent of a resigned sigh. Professor Qrell, sitting in the front row, leapt to his feet, fins fully extended in outrage. This is absurd. The Zarkonian Academy has maintained the highest standards in the galaxy for 12 millennia. We can't just open our doors to any floating gas cloud or silicon-based hive mind that applies. I share your concerns, Professor Dean Volmar chimed, her tones indicating agreement. However, the council was quite insistent. They've tied our quantum research funding to compliance. The room erupted in a cacophony of protests, whistles, clicks, electromagnetic pulses, and various other species-specific expressions of academic indignation. Administrator Plex, a gelatinous mass of neural tissue floating in a controlled gravity field, bobbed anxiously. Dean Volmar, please tell me we at least have discretion over which species we must accept. Unfortunately not. The council specifically mentioned that underrepresented species must be given priority, and her crystalline structure dimmed momentarily. Humans have already submitted an application. The room fell silent, then exploded again with even louder objections. Humans Professor Nextari's 7-eye stalks whipped around wildly. Those water-filled bipeds who've barely mastered interstellar travel. They still use chemical propulsion for their secondary drives. Coach Braz AK's 12 limbs twisted into the gesture his species used to indicate extreme skepticism. Their physical education will be a nightmare. They have no natural armor, no secondary limbs, and they're susceptible to nearly every environmental variation. The human applicant Maya Chen will arrive next week, Dean Volmar continued, ignoring the commotion. We will provide the necessary atmospheric accommodations, adjust gravity in designated areas, and modify our curriculum as minimally as possible. Professor Lunara, always the pragmatist, raised a feeding tendril. Perhaps we should view this as a research opportunity. No one has ever comprehensively studied human learning capabilities in an advanced setting. An excellent suggestion, Dean Volmar chimed, brightening slightly. Professor Qrell, as our most vocal skeptic, I'm assigning you as the human's academic advisor. Lumi Qrell's skin flushed a deep purple with horror. I teach 11-dimensional calculus and quantum probability. The human brain can barely conceptualize 4 dimensions. Precisely, Dean Volmar replied, her crystal structure displaying the pattern that passed for amusement among her kind. Document everything. I expect weekly reports on the human struggles. When the inevitable failure occurs, we'll have ample evidence to present to the council against this ridiculous initiative. As the meeting adjourned, Professor Qrell remained in his seat, fins drooping in resignation. Babysitting a primitive human was definitely not how he'd planned to spend this academic cycle. Coach Braz AK stomped around the academy's massive gymnasium on his 12 muscular limbs, barking orders at his assistant coaches while his exoskeleton gleamed under the specialized athletic lighting. Easier. I said make it easier. Are you trying to kill the human on its first day? The assistant scrambled to adjust the equipment, lowering gravity wells, reducing the electric charge on the obstacle course, and dialing down the temperature of the lava pit to a mere 600 degrees Celsius. This is ridiculous, Braz AK muttered to Professor Qrell, who had come to observe the preparations. We've had to completely dismantle our standard physical education curriculum. The multidimensional dodge challenge alone took 3 cycles to perfect. Qrell's fins fluttered with amusement. The human will fail regardless, my friend. Their species can barely survive in more than one gravitational direction at a time. Remember, we need only provide the opportunity for failure, not guarantee it. I suppose Braz AK conceded, his central eye rolling dramatically. Still, look at this, he gestured toward a modified hover platform. We've had to install handrails, as if falling into the quantum foam below is somehow dangerous. Assistant Coach Ziv, a gaseous entity who specialized in aerodynamic movement training, condensed briefly beside them. Coach, we've modified the aerial obstacle course for the human. Since they can't naturally fly, levitate, or phase through solid matter, we've installed these things. She gestured dismissively at a set of primitive climbing bars. What do they call those again? Braz AK asked, poking one with a tentacle. Ladders, I believe, Qrell replied with a derisive snort. Humans use them to overcome their pathetic inability to manipulate gravitational fields or extrude climbing appendages. Across the gymnasium, more modifications were underway. The acid pool had been drained and replaced with ordinary water. The molecular disassembly maze had been reprogrammed to merely provide mild electric shocks rather than completely dispersing and recombining the atomic structure of participants. Even the psychic obstacle course had been dumbed down to require only basic spatial reasoning rather than full 11-dimensional visualization. "What about the strength assessment station?" Braz AK asked his third assistant, a crystalline being who sparkled with barely contained disdain. "We've reduced the weight spheres to only 50 kilograms," the assistant replied. "Apparently, the average human can barely lift their own body weight. Can you imagine such weakness?" The coaches shared a moment of smug amusement, their various appendages, gaseous formations, and crystalline structures conveying universal derision across species barriers. "And the endurance course?" Braz Ake inquired, consulting his hover tablet. "We've shortened it to only 5 kilometers," another assistant reported, "and removed the underwater segment entirely. Apparently, humans can only hold their breath for a few minutes before suffering permanent brain damage. Such design flaws." Professor Qrell nodded sagely. Their evolutionary path was clearly a dead end. It's a miracle they achieved space travel at all. Coach Braz Ake gestured toward a small scanning device attached to his exoskeleton. "We've even prepared medical monitoring equipment specifically calibrated for human physiology. Ambassador Trell insisted we track the human's vital signs during physical exertion." He pronounced the strange term with obvious confusion. "Vital signs?" Qrell asked. "Apparently, their circulatory system can just stop working if they exert themselves too much," Braz Ake explained, all 12 limbs gesturing in disbelief. "They have a single fluid pumping organ that can simply cease functioning under stress. Can you imagine such poor engineering?" "Fascinating," Qrell remarked. "Make sure to record all data. This will make an excellent case study in evolutionary disadvantages." As the final modifications were completed, a hush fell over the gymnasium. The human student, Maya Chen, had appeared in the doorway, dressed in the Academy's standard physical training uniform, which hung awkwardly on her bizarrely symmetrical bipedal form. "Welcome, human student Chen," Coach Braz AK announced with exaggerated enthusiasm. "We've prepared a special physical assessment course just for your species." The emphasis on special made it clear that pathetically simple was the intended meaning. Maya looked around the gymnasium, taking in the modified equipment with a slight smile. "Thank you, Coach. This looks interesting." The assembled coaches and observing faculty exchanged knowing glances. They had no idea what was about to hit them. "Let's begin with something simple," Coach Braz Ake announced, emphasizing the word simple with a condescending flick of his tertiary limbs. "The basic endurance assessment. 5 kilometers around the track modified to accommodate your species' lack of multidirectional mobility." Maya Chen nodded pleasantly, stretching her arms above her head in a way that made several alien students blink in confusion at the strange flexibility of human joints. By now, nearly half the academy had found excuses to observe the spectacle. Faculty members pretended to be reviewing curriculum on their datapads, while students clustered in viewing areas, some taking bets on how quickly the human would collapse. "I've prepared a hover chair for when you need to rest," Coach Braz AK added magnanimously. "Your species' endurance limitations are well documented. No shame in needing breaks." "Thank you," Coach Maya replied with that strange human mouth curve. "But I should be fine." Professor Qrell, watching from the observation platform, snorted audibly. His species research indicated humans could barely maintain mild exertion for 30 minutes before requiring hydration and rest. The signal pulsed, and Maya began running. 3 minutes later, the gymnasium had fallen completely silent, except for the steady rhythm of Maya's feet hitting the track. "She's maintaining a consistent pace," whispered assistant coach Ziv, her gaseous form condensing with surprise. "It's only been 3 minutes," Braz AK replied dismissively. "The real test is sustain." "She's increasing speed," interrupted another coach, staring at the monitoring equipment in disbelief. Indeed, Maya had subtly accelerated, her breathing controlled, her movements efficient. As she completed the first kilometer, she showed no signs of fatigue, no struggling respirations, no decrease in form. By the 3rd kilometer, the whispers had grown louder. "How is it not stopping to rest? Where are the signs of lactic acid buildup? Its single pump circulatory system should be failing by now." Professor Qrell's fins were fully extended in shock as he reviewed the medical data streaming from the monitoring equipment. The human's vital signs showed elevated but completely stable functions. Her strange single heart was pumping rapidly but efficiently, her oxygen utilization was optimal, and her body temperature was elevating in a controlled manner to facilitate continued exertion. This was not what the xenobiology textbooks predicted. As Maya crossed the 5-kilometer mark without a single rest break, Coach Braz's exoskeleton had paled considerably. "Very good," he said stiffly. "You've completed the endurance assessment." Maya wasn't even breathing heavily. That was a nice warm-up. What's next? The coach exchanged alarmed glances with his assistants. This was not proceeding according to expectations. The strength assessment station, he directed, all 12 limbs gesturing toward the modified equipment. "But perhaps you should hydrate first," he added hopefully. "I'm fine for now." "Thanks," Maya replied, walking calmly to the strength station where several weight spheres of increasing mass awaited. He'd begin with the smallest coach instructed, indicating a 10-kilogram sphere. "The gravity field has been adjusted to." Before he could finish, Maya had already lifted the sphere with one hand, examining it curiously. Interesting material, some kind of density-adjustable alloy. The coach blinked all 5 eyes simultaneously. "Correct." "Now, if that's too challenging." Maya placed it back and proceeded to lift the 25-kilogram sphere, then the 50-kilogram one with apparent ease. When she approached the 100-kilogram sphere intended for the strongest non-exoskeletal species, Professor Qrell leaned forward in horrified fascination. With focused effort but no apparent strain, Maya lifted the massive sphere clear off the ground. A crystalline student shattered in shock, their self-healing matrix activating with an audible chime. "Impossible," muttered Qrell. "Their muscle fibers should be tearing at that load." Coach Braz had abandoned all pretense of composure. The flexibility assessment. Now he barked, pointing Maya toward a chamber designed to test range of motion. What followed could only be described as physically horrifying to most of the alien observers. Maya bent, twisted, and contorted her seemingly fragile human body in ways that defied the xenobiological understanding of their skeletal structure. She touched her toes with straight legs in action that caused several invertebrate students to emit distress pheromones and demonstrated something called a split that made even the amorphous students cringe in sympathetic pain. "Is this correct?" Maya asked, her body forming an alarming right angle that shouldn't have been possible with an internal skeleton. Coach Braz couldn't even respond. His exoskeleton had locked up in shock. "The obstacle course," Professor Qrell interjected desperately. "Surely the human cannot navigate multidimensional space." Maya approached the simplified obstacle course, still challenging by most species standards, with its varying gravity wells, electric barriers, and climbing challenges. What should have taken 30 minutes to carefully navigate, she completed in 6, using a combination of strength, flexibility, and what appeared to be remarkably quick problem-solving. When she emerged from the final element, swinging from the primitive ladder apparatus to land perfectly balanced on the finished platform, the entire gymnasium erupted in chaos. Students were frantically updating their species databases. Faculty members were calming colleagues with urgent revisions to xenobiology texts. Someone had apparently contacted Galactic News Network. Through it all, Maya stood calmly, barely showing signs of exertion beyond a light gleam of perspiration on her forehead. "That was invigorating," she commented to the shell-shocked Coach Braz. "Do you have anything more challenging?" "On Earth, I usually train at much higher intensity." Professor Qrell, who had been frantically analyzing the medical data, finally approached her. "Human Chen, Maya, how is this possible? Your species profile indicates severe physical limitations." Maya smiled, that expression that was becoming increasingly unnerving to the faculty. "Professor, with respect, your data on humans is outdated and incomplete. We're not the strongest, fastest, or most durable species, certainly. But what you've overlooked is one of our primary evolutionary advantages." "Which is?" Qrell asked, fins twitching with scientific curiosity despite himself. "Adaptability," Maya replied simply. "And specifically our endurance. Humans aren't just persistence hunters, we're persistence everything. We evolved to just keep going." Coach Braz had finally regained his composure. But the gravity, the atmospheric variations, the physical stress. Maya shrugged, that strange human gesture that somehow conveyed so much. We adapt. It's what we do best. As she walked toward the hydration station, finally reaching for some water, she left behind a gymnasium full of aliens rapidly reconsidering everything they thought they knew about the supposed limitations of humanity. The Academy's xenobiology lab had never been so crowded. Professors, researchers, and medical students from across the institution crammed into the circular chamber, jostling for position around the central holographic display where Professor Qrell was presenting his findings. His usually impeccable fins were slightly rumpled from 3 straight nights without proper hydration cycles. As you can see from these readings, he explained, gesturing to the rotating hologram of Maya Chen's physiological systems captured during the gymnasium incident, human biology is not what our textbook suggested. Professor Lunara's feeding tendrils curled with scientific excitement. Their heat regulation system is fascinating. The liquid secretion through specialized pores. Sweat, Qrell corrected. They call it sweat, and yes, it's remarkably efficient. The evaporative cooling allows them to maintain internal homeostasis even during extended periods of exertion. Dean Volmar's crystalline structure vibrated with what might have been concern. But how did our research get this so wrong? The Galactic Encyclopedia of Sentient Physiology clearly states humans can only sustain moderate physical activity for 30 minutes before requiring rest. Maya Chen, who had been invited to the session and was sitting quietly in a specially designed chair, cleared her throat. All 417 sensory organs in the room swiveled in her direction. If I may, she offered, your encyclopedia isn't exactly wrong. An average, untrained human might indeed struggle after 30 minutes of moderate exertion. But we're incredibly adaptable. Through something we call training, we can significantly extend those limits. Training, repeated Coach Braz, AK, all 12 limbs gesticulating in confusion. You mean deliberately stressing physiological systems to force adaptation? But that's exactly how we've survived as a species, Maya finished with a nod. When we encounter physical stress repeatedly, our bodies adapt to meet the challenge. My cardiovascular capacity, muscle density, and respiratory efficiency all increased through deliberate, progressive stress application. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. For most species present, physiological parameters were largely fixed at birth, with only minor variations possible throughout life. But that's not all, Qrell continued, his scientific curiosity overcoming his previous prejudice. Look at these skeletal structure scans. Human bones are constantly remodeling themselves in response to stress. They literally become stronger when damaged. Within limits, Maya clarified with a smile. Break them completely and they need help to heal properly. Professor Nextari's eye stalks waved with excitement. And this explains the calcium formations we detected throughout your skeletal structure, microfractures that healed stronger than before. We call them stress fractures, Maya confirmed. Common among runners and other athletes. Dean Volmar floated closer to the hologram, her crystalline form catching the light. But surely there are upper physiological limits that cannot be transcended? You cannot, for example, survive in the vacuum of space or breathe water. Not naturally, no, Maya conceded. But that brings us to our second great advantage, technological adaptation. When we can't adapt biologically, we create tools that let us adapt anyway. Spacesuits, underwater breathing apparatus, climate-controlled habitats, we extend our adaptability through technology. Coach Braz, AK's exoskeleton, clicked thoughtfully. So the physical limitations we observed in early human space explorers were just snapshots of individuals at a specific moment in their development, Maya explained. Both as individuals and as a species, we're constantly adapting, constantly improving. Professor Qrell pulled up new data on the holographic display. Most remarkable of all is this endurance capacity. Humans evolved as what they call persistence hunters, literally chasing prey until the prey collapses from exhaustion. A wave of discomfort passed through the herbivorous species present. But that requires extraordinary metabolic efficiency, Professor Lunara noted. How do you maintain energy output over such extended periods? Glycogen storage, fat utilization, and yes, remarkably efficient oxygen processing, Maya explained. We're not the fastest or strongest species, but we can just keep going, often for hours or even days with minimal rest. Days, several voices chorused in disbelief. Maya nodded. The record for continuous running without sleep is over 300 hours. Though I should add that's extremely unusual and not recommended. The room erupted in a cacophony of scientific exclamations, questions, and the distinct sound of academic paradigms shattering. Professor Qrell restored order with a vibrating pulse from his authority glands. Colleagues, I believe we need to significantly revise our understanding of human physiology. Their adaptive capacity suggests a level of evolutionary fitness we've seriously underestimated. As the academics digested this information, Maya sat quietly, a small smile playing across her face. The Academy's understanding of humanity was being rewritten before her eyes exactly as the Earth delegation had hoped when they sent her here. Professor Qrell sat alone in his private chamber, staring at the data crystals scattered across his desk. Each one contained updated research on human physiology, cognitive patterns, and adaptive capabilities, research that directly contradicted nearly everything he had previously taught about the species. His fins drooped with the weight of scientific humility, a sensation he hadn't experienced in over 3 centuries. With a resigned sigh, he activated his communication array. Faculty meeting. Urgent. Full attendance required, he announced to the Academy network. 1 hour later, the great hall hummed with the nervous energy of confused academics. Rumors had spread through the neural networks and pheromone channels faster than authorized information could travel. Dean Volmar's crystalline form shimmered at the head of the table. Professor Qrell, this is highly irregular. You've called an emergency session without providing any agenda items. Qrell rose, his usual academic pomposity notably absent. Esteemed colleagues, I've spent the past week analyzing the data from human Chen's physical and cognitive assessments. I've come to a conclusion that I find personally difficult but scientifically necessary to share. The room fell silent, even the normally bubbling gaseous professors stabilizing their forms to listen. We have been wrong about humans. Catastrophically, embarrassingly wrong. A collective gasp rippled through the assembly, manifested in various species appropriate ways, from light flashes to ultrasonic clicks. The data doesn't lie, Qrell continued, projecting a series of comparative analyses into the center of the room. What we interpreted as evolutionary weaknesses are actually sophisticated adaptations. Their seemingly fragile bodies are remarkably resilient. Their apparent cognitive limitations mask astonishing problem-solving flexibility. Professor Nextari's eye stalks whipped around agitatedly. But their brains are so simple, purely electrochemical. No quantum entanglement, no psychic lobes, no distributed consciousness. And yet, Qrell countered, human Chen solved Professor Zarbulian's 11-dimensional logic puzzle in 17 minutes. The previous non-psychic species record was 3 days. Coach Braz aka Exoskeleton clicked nervously. Their physical endurance in the gymnasium was unexpected, but surely that's just one exceptional specimen. I thought the same, Qrell admitted. So I reviewed historical records from their planetary information network. Humans regularly engage in activities they call ultramarathons, running continuous distances of 100 kilometers or more. Some swim across entire oceans. Others climb frozen mountains without breathing assistance. Their adaptive range is extraordinary. Dean Volmar's crystal structure pulsed with skepticism. Even if their physical capabilities are greater than we thought, their technological development is barely Category 3. Their computing systems still use electricity, for cosmic sake. Professor Lunara, who had been quietly absorbing the discussion through her sensory tendrils, finally spoke. Yet they advanced from primitive combustion engines to faster-than-light travel in less than 300 years. Compare that to the Voltar Collective, who took 12 millennia to make the same leap. Precisely, Qrell exclaimed, his fins extending with academic fervor. It's their rate of adaptation that we've failed to appreciate. Most species follow predictable developmental curves, but humans are explosively innovative. Professor Zan, the quantum computing specialist, vibrated his gelatinous form. I reviewed human Chen's proposed modifications to our probability engines. Her approach was unorthodox, but simulations show a potential efficiency increase of 31.7%, using principles that never occurred to us because they're so non-intuitive, supplied Professor Lunara. Humans excel at conceptual leaps that defy linear progression. The room had fallen into a contemplative silence, hundreds of alien minds grappling with a fundamental shift in their understanding of the galactic order. So what do you propose? Dean Volmar finally asked, her crystalline form dimmed in thought. Qrell straightened to his full height, fins fully extended in formal academic posture. I propose we revise our xenobiological classifications to recognize adaptive potential as a primary evolutionary metric. I propose we update the Galactic Encyclopedia entries on humanity, and most importantly, he paused, the words clearly difficult for him. I propose we acknowledge that the human species deserves their place at this academy not as curiosities, but as intellectual peers with unique perspectives to offer. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft chiming of Dean Volmar's crystalline structure as she processed this recommendation. Well, she finally responded, I never thought I'd live to see Professor Qrell advocate for a species he previously classified as barely more advanced than photosynthesizing rock dwellers. A ripple of multi-species laughter broke the tension. Perhaps the Dean continued, her structure brightening. This is precisely what the Galactic Council hoped for when they implemented the diversity initiative, that we would all learn something unexpected from each other. As the faculty meeting concluded with unprecedented revisions to academy classifications, Professor Qrell found himself wondering what other surprises the human student might bring to their ordered academic world. The great hall of the Zarkonian Academy had been transformed. Spectral lights, in all 7 visual dimensions, flickered across the cavernous space. Gravitational fields had been carefully calibrated to accommodate the movement patterns of over 30 different species. Even the atmospheric composition shifted subtly throughout the room, ensuring optimal respiration for all attendees. I never thought I'd see the day, Coach Brazek commented to Professor Lunara, all 12 of his limbs adorned with formal academic bangles. An entire celebration in honor of a human. The first of many cultural exchanges, I suspect, Lunara replied, her feeding tendrils elegantly coiled in festive patterns. The Dean has already approved 6 more human applications for next semester. Across the hall, Chen stood surrounded by a group of students from various species, demonstrating something called dancing, a rhythmic movement practice that had fascinated the Academy's kinesthetic specialists. Several amorphous students were attempting to mimic her movements with mixed, and rather comical, results. Simply remarkable, Dean Volmar chimed, her crystalline structure glittering with formal approval patterns as she approached Professor Qrell. Your recommendation to create a new department of adaptive studies focusing on human physiological and cognitive techniques has been approved by the Galactic Academic Council. Qrell's fins fluttered with surprise. So quickly? The council usually deliberates for at least 3 cycles. Apparently, news of Maya's performance in your 11-dimensional physics examination caused quite a stir. Several council members have offspring they're now considering sending here specifically to study alongside humans. Qrell nearly choked on his nutrient mist. The galaxy's elite wanting to study with humans rather than simply about them? Things are changing faster than I anticipated. Change, noted the Dean, appears to be what humans do best. At that moment, the ceremonial tones reverberated through the hall, calling for attention. The crowd parted as Ambassador Qrell glided to the central platform, his diplomatic tentacles arranged in the pattern of formal announcement. Esteemed members of the Zarkonian Academy, honored guests, and especially our groundbreaking human student, Chen, the ambassador began, his voice modulator set to impressive oratory frequency. It is my distinct pleasure to announce that the Interspecies Educational Exchange Initiative has been unanimously declared a success. Polite appendage tapping the multi-species equivalent of applause rippled through the gathering. In recognition of this success, the Galactic Council has approved expansion of the program to all 17 major academic institutions. Furthermore, he paused dramatically, tentacles quivering. Earth has agreed to welcome exchange students from our institutions. This announcement triggered a wave of excited communications, neural broadcasts, pheromone releases, electromagnetic pulses, and even some primitive vocalizations from the less evolved species. Maya stepped forward, looking momentarily overwhelmed by the attention. Thank you, Ambassador. I'm honored to be the first human at the Zarkonian Academy, but certainly not the last. I believe we all have much to learn from each other. She turned toward Professor Qrell with that distinctive human smile. Professor, your willingness to reconsider your views based on new evidence is the true hallmark of a scientist. In that spirit, I've prepared a research proposal combining your expertise in multidimensional fluid dynamics with some human approaches to problem solving. Qrell's fins extended with unmistakable academic excitement. A collaborative research project? That would be most intellectually stimulating. and potentially revolutionary, added the dean, her crystalline structure pulsing with approval. As the celebration continued, species that had evolved on planets light years apart found themselves engaging in something remarkable: genuine exchange of perspectives. Gaseous entities discussed poetry with silicon-based life forms. Photosynthetic professors shared nutrient formulas with carbon-based students. And at the center of it all, Maya Chen moved easily between groups, a living bridge between fundamentally different ways of experiencing the universe. Professor Qrell observed it all with a sensation he hadn't experienced in centuries: the humbling, exhilarating feeling of having one's understanding of the cosmos fundamentally expanded. Perhaps he mused to himself, his voice too low for others to hear, "We have as much to learn from humans as they have to learn from us." And somewhere in the vastness of the galaxy, the Galactic Council noted with satisfaction that the first step toward a truly integrated interstellar community had been taken not through grand political gestures or economic treaties, but through the simple act of different species sweating together in gym class.